We all like different angles. All right, welcome to the latest installment of the Run to Daylight podcast. I'm your host, Todd Burrows, and today we have a very special guest, Justin Herzig, or is it Herzog?
It's Herzig. It's Herzig. Definitely Whitey.
So Justin was the big winner of the Underdog Fantasy tournament last year, and we are going to talk some best ball for about 30 minutes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a live draft on Underdog. We'll give you guys a little bit of notice. I've opened up the comments. Henry Mudo is there. And of course, he's saying that I was 2 minutes late. Yes. This podcast is brought to you by the FFPC, our friends over at the FFPC. We will talk some FFPC best ball as well during this session, as the FFPC has broken out their first ever best ball tournament with a $500,000 up top. $125 tournament, only 5% rake if you take credits. Justin was nice enough to tell me that works out to about 7% rake overall. And I've been doing a lot of best ball with the FFPC, so I am going to dig in there. DraftKings has also opened up, and of course, Underdog, we are going to talk to a lot today. Go to myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. Check out the new draft. I forget what they call it, but there is a new way that you can set it and forget it. And that's also exciting. Justin, welcome to the show.
Cheers. Thanks for having me. Been drafting against you for the past few years, and it's great to kind of finally jump on the show and kind of talk some best ball as the really off season and the best ball season really starts kicking off.
Yeah, it seems like best ball's a little slower this year because everyone was caught up in NBA Top Shot around the time that best ball got started. But let's start with, I think, the question everyone is going to want to know. 200K, how, if anything, has it changed your life and also your bankroll and how you're willing to spend money on fantasy sports?
Yeah, no, it last year was a very, very fortunate year for me in all of DFS. I think 3 different weekends I ended up hitting 6-figure scores. And so, without a doubt, that is a year that I will forever look back on as just being kind of, the big year, the pinnacle. Going forward, I wouldn't say from a process-wise, it's actually changed much from an actual day-to-day. It's more of just... I think the biggest one is probably joining Establish the Run. And it was someone who I've been talking to for a while and good friends with a lot of the guys over there. And
which I should have mentioned when I introed you.
No
Justin Herzig of Establish the Run.
There you go. And no, I'd be lying if I didn't admit that, a lot of the reason why I was brought over there is because of the fortunate outcome with the Underdog. And obviously from a process wise, there's just a lot of great discussion and things that we think that we can kind of teach and educate the community. I've been in the DFS for the past probably 4 or 5 years, been doing best ball pretty seriously for the past 3. I guess my claim to shame or claim to fame, depending on how we want to put it, is 2 years ago, I did 30,000 best ball drafts in one summer. And so I've been doing this for a while, and this was the first year that I decided, hey, I think there's an opportunity to help grow the game, help grow the game of best ball. And if I can kind of help from an education strategy aspect and help people kind of, devise their own methods going forward, I think it's better for everyone.
Yeah, it's so funny because a couple years ago, I won about 20 grand playing DFS. I play about 800 a Sunday. And I thought a lot of what I had learned with best ball would translate over to DFS, and it did. This year, I had 5, 6, 7 sweats, just like my big year. But instead of coming in 3rd, 4th, 5th place, and I had a 16th in the Millie Maker that year. This year, my Millie Maker was 36. And it's a big difference in profit. And all my 5 out of 6 weeks, I was like right there with one of my 100 lineups in some tournament, but I didn't get higher than 7th. And a couple, and it's so top heavy, Justin. People don't. It's interesting for me to hear you say that you got lucky And you didn't get lucky, and because you put your, we put ourselves in the position to win. But there is kind of it does seem to come down to the 2 or 3 plays at the end that can either win you a lot of money or win you enough money so that you refill your bankroll.
Right, without a doubt. And when I say that I was, very fortunate, and obviously luck's involved, I agree with you. A lot of it is the process and putting yourself in the right place so that when things go right, you can kind of catch the right side of variance. But without a doubt, like when you think back to what happened in Week 16 with the Underdog Championship, there were a lot of teams on Monday night in that Bills-Patriots game that had Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs in that stack. And I believe Stephon Diggs went for about 180 yards, 3 touchdowns. Josh Allen maybe had 4 in total, threw for like 300 and some yards. It was an absolute bombshell of a game between the two. And I think they put up something like 70 plus fantasy points. And it wasn't until the final drive of the game where they're up 20 plus points with a couple minutes left in the game. And I think it was if Stephon Diggs had maybe another 15-yard catch or something, I would have been passed. But it wasn't until that final drive that they took Josh Allen out. They took Stephon Diggs out. Cole Beasley actually still played another play, and that could have caught me if he would have had another like 30 yards and a catch. But he got hurt on the next play. So they're like, oh, okay, now we should rest everyone. But like the ball flipped, like such minute things. And like, I don't want to say people are very, what's happened past that, being the champion, seeing my lineup being a lot of people kind of taking this hyper fragile build. A flip of the football, very different, could have been a difference for me, obviously, of $150,000. And maybe we're thinking about this draft season very differently. But the truth is, the process and the strategy hasn't changed. So for people that are listening to this, don't take my word for anything I'm saying because I won that tournament, because that was just at the end of the day, it came down to one game. It's more of if you agree with the strategy and the articles and the discussion that we're having, and that resonates with you and you trust the data-backed approach, then that's what you should be following going forward.
Well, and that's the thing. It's, there's always this discussion of data versus, having a feel for things, right? And really it's both, right? Last year, I got really good, I feel, at using an optimizer. I felt like as good as I had been a couple years ago when taking down that money, using an optimizer and getting good at rules was a way for me to continue to be good going forward, and making really interesting. It's about making good lineups. So you didn't have Josh Allen on your winning team. Who was on your team?
Yeah, so the main player, I can go through the whole team, but in general, it was the Alvin Kamara was the one that really set me apart, because that was the Christmas game. Alvin Kamara put up, I believe it was 6 touchdowns, would have had 7 if Taysom Hill didn't steal his. And that was the only person in the entire championship field that had Alvin Kamara. Now, why was that? Well, some of it was because Alvin Kamara had some mediocre playoffs. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. Some of it also was Derrick Henry was on a ton of the teams. And with Derrick Henry, you're not going to draft Kamara and Derrick Henry. And same with Dalvin Cook. You had a lot of those in the playoffs. So a lot of it came down to just I was fortunate that I had some form of a contrarian, even though it's hard to say Alvin Kamara's contrarian, but that's what it ended up in there. The rest of the team is I went with a couple mini stacks. I had Matt Ryan to go with Calvin Ridley. I had Tom Brady to go with Rob Gronkowski. And then I also went for a Week 16 game stack because I'm a believer that, especially with these tournaments, that Week 16, there's a ton of value in finishing up top. The difference between something like 10th and going to be first this year is going to be $900,000+. And so, in these strategies, figuring out how can we kind of optimize for Week 16. Yes, some people are like, okay, this is a good opponent in Week 16, or maybe they have a good playoff schedule because those defenses are bad or the offenses are good, so it'll be a shutout. That's really difficult to predict year over year. But what I can predict is that if there are 2 teams that we think are going to have a shootout or something, at the least we know that the schedule's not going to change, heaven forbid with the COVID stuff. But schedules don't change. So what I did is I said, okay, I want to go for 2 teams that I know are playing against each other. And I believe, memory serves me right, that was Falcons and Chiefs. And so I built myself a little game stack saying I got Matt Ryan, I got Calvin Ridley, I got Travis Kelce. If that game becomes a blowout, I've got a lot of the kind of dynamics there that could really push me into that first place. And turns out that game actually wasn't that much of a blowout, but it did enough for me. Kelsey's, obviously counted. Gronk had his 2 touchdowns. The whole week just kind of came together. But again, I care far more about the process than the actual 1 week result.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's interesting. And I honestly didn't do enough of that last year. I would look at the whole playoff schedule, and, I think and we're going to get into this a little bit because there are some differences in the FFPC tournament. But it's funny because Kamara is what got that team to first place, and then him having a couple off weeks and you still finding a way to get that team into the final made it so that the guy who had one of the highest win rates on the year was only on one of 12 teams. So, there's so much you can figure out, and that's why I go back to rules. What are rules in DFS? It's basically saying, if I'm going to have a Chief, I want to bring it back. If I'm going to have a Mahomes stack, I want to bring it back with a Falcon. And that's, if I understand you correctly, that's basically one of the key things you built into these teams was bringing back week 16 players from other guys that you had on the team.
Yep, exactly. And so for this year, I start looking at, and obviously I want to make sure that it's strong game environments as well. Like if I look at the schedule and stuff and you see a game Jaguars at Patriots, like I just, not caring too much about those teams. I'm not going to get many of those guys. But if I looked at that Chiefs Bengals, I think that's an interesting way to build a stack without having to pay for the Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce. You could still end up taking a Tyreek or a Kelce early on because that's good value. Not have to overpay for a Mahomes, but maybe you end up later on getting that kind of Burrow with another one or two of his pass catchers. And now you're building yourself. I think especially if you get Kelce, that's beautiful because you're getting your tight end spot. You got Burrow with maybe two of his pass catchers, and now you're building for that game stack. So if that Chiefs at Bengals game in week 17 turns into a blowout and you somehow make it to that finals, you're set up pretty nicely. And yes, a lot of things have to happen along the way for you to get there. But when you're trying to turn $25 into $1 million, you got to try hard. You got to take some chances, and you hope for the best.
But it's correlations. And again, back to DFS, it's about making correlations that can make a difference and putting them in your lineup, and then making enough lineups to give yourself a chance for variation to hit. And that's basically what you did. And I haven't heard it like that, and I love it. I every once in a while when I'm talking, I tell people that I do this podcast to be better. It's like interviewing you, but really it's part of my own process to talk to people like you, because I'm 58 years old, but I want to be better tomorrow than I was yesterday. And, that was one that when you just said that I was like, geez, that's dynamite. So I do want to talk that you're a big proponent of 2 quarterback, 2 tight end, and spending a lot of your assets on the other positions, specifically wide receiver. Were there specific numbers from your research? You were talking about numbers. What numbers from your research kind of led you to that strategy?
Yeah, so we've seen these hyper-fragile builds have some of the highest win rates, even though historically they haven't been used that often. But from a data-wise, and so my colleague established around Michael Leone, he's actually published some data on this around the win rates for teams, especially with the underdog format, which is the 18 draft spots, taking those 4 running backs and then going heavy elsewhere. And so start off, I don't have the numbers for you, but trust me, the data backs it up. Okay, now let's figure out intuitively, why does it back it up? Well, if I'm doing a redraft league, me, 11 buds, I actually like wide receivers a lot. I want to draft wide receiver early, and that's where zero RB comes from, because you can figure out the waiver wire, get your running backs later. But the wide receivers, finding a guy like Devontae Adams or even someone maybe a tier down like a Hopkins that week in and week out is getting you 8, 9, 10 targets, is putting up those yards, like that's really valuable for a redraft league and someone that you need to start. Now, in best ball, it's not as valuable, because I can make up with that because the wide receiver position is so volatile. If I just have a ton of wide receivers, I can find and say, hey, these guys aren't going to often get their big games, but it's a lot of guys that are getting 5 for 50, 6 for 60 on a weekly basis. But you throw in that touchdown or you throw in that one big play, And things all change here. And so because the wide receiver is one of the most volatile positions, it allows me to say, okay, I'm going to not overspend on the guys at the top of the draft for wide receiver. And instead, I'm going to go with a level of depth and use my depth to make up for that lack of quality. Quantity makes up for quality. What do I do with the rest of my positions? Okay, well, running back, I'm only drafting 4. So, and not every time, but we're saying if I'm doing this for hyperfragile build and I'm only drafting 4, I know that those running backs need to carry my team for the whole year. And so what I'm normally doing is in the first 3 rounds, I usually have 2 running backs. And then I grab another 2 probably in the next kind of 4 to 6 rounds where there's either value, complementary, etc. Now, yes, that leaves me as a risky position if one of those top 2 running backs I drafted either gets hurt or completely underperforms. But the truth is, even if I drafted more running backs, even if I change my style, if you end up losing your first round draft pick or one of your first, first 2 or 3 round running backs fails, your team probably wasn't going to do that well anyways. So all I'm doing is saying that, hey, I'm probably avoiding that middle position and I'm trying to either finish at the top or say, if something happens, let it burn. I don't care. 3rd place is the same thing. Same thing as last in these tournaments. So I grab my 4 running backs. I've got a wealth of wide receivers. And now we got to figure out that quarterback tight end position. So as you said, primarily, I'd love to get 2 QBs, 2 tight ends. Usually what ends up happening is if one of those 2 positions is weak, I'll add a 3rd, primarily more in the tight end. But that allows me that, a lot of people are like, hey, I'll just go 3 quarterbacks because I'll get value. And between the 3 of them, someone's going to be able to put up like a legitimate score each week. Yes, that's probably true. But what are you missing out here? Okay, well, 2 things. 1, you're missing out on weekly upside. If you're not grabbing one of these running backs that either is a absolute performer, high end of the passing range, and Rodgers, Brady over the past couple of years, what we've seen, we can throw in some of the guys, maybe like a Matt Ryan. I'm not a fan, but like those are the only guys that really have, that have that upside without having the floor of, without having the rushing upside. Primarily, if you draft those 3 late guys, you're missing that weekly upside that the kind of top 10, 12 QBs give you. Second thing is you're also taking up a draft spot that I want to use for one of my late wide receivers. So not only are you limiting your upside, you're also wasting a position that I'd rather be using elsewhere for that wide receiver. So it kind of becomes a double whammy if you take that kind of late 3 QB approach. And thus I'm saying, hey, I'm willing to go with 2 QBs that are usually in the kind of top 14, top 15 area, guys who have rushing upside. I'm willing to take chances on these rookies and say, you know what, if they have that great year, they can provide with the weekly upside, it's going to make my team great. If not, I'm okay with it because, again, we can't be kind of too cautious. We can't be too risk averse in these. We've got to take chances when our goal is for that upside.
Yeah, I mean, it does go against kind of where my head's been at this year. My head has been, kind of roto-vizzy, wide receivers outscore running backs throughout the whole draft. So what I try and do, and it does lead me to take early running backs in the 1st and 2nd round, sometimes the 3rd round if a guy I like drops. And the reason is I want to draft my running backs when they're as close to wide receiver points as possible. And in general, because of positional scarcity, there's a much bigger taper off at running back than there is at wide receiver. That being said, I do tend to be balanced as well. So are you saying you don't draft wide receivers in the 1st and 2nd round, 3rd round too often?
Rarely am I taking a wide receiver in the first 2 rounds, 3rd round maybe. In the 1st round, I think almost every one of my drafts is either a running back or Travis Kelce. In the 2nd round, same thing. I'm almost always getting one of those 2nd running backs or one of those elite other tight ends. For me, it's just not worth it for me to kind of position myself with a top elite, wide receiver when I'd rather take the structure of saying, hey, I'm just going to be drafting 9 wide receivers. Because I know that I can make up for that lack of an elite wide receiver by having a bunch of depth, but it's much more difficult to make up for that lack of an elite running back or lack of a 2nd elite running back with running back depth. Because that's what we see year over year is that, yes, occasionally your running back will get those starts and actually turn into like a starter and produce, but more likely than not, a backup running back isn't going to help you. But that second string, third string wide receiver on the actual team, they're still on the field. They're still getting snaps. Yeah. They're still getting targets. They still have the opportunity to blow up. And so when I think about which of these two guys between Stephon Diggs and Austin Eckler am I more able to recreate or recreate or make up for their output, it's a lot easier to do that at wide receiver than find the running back that you hopefully hit on and hope that he breaks out.
Yeah, it isn't the way that I've played, but it certainly makes a lot of sense. So here's another question, though. It's one of the old things. I know Dink works for you guys over at ETR, and I know he's talked a lot about the struggle of being a good player and being a good analyst and giving away your good stuff. As more people go to any strategy and it becomes more popular, it can also tip the scale on what will end up being optimal in the present. Are there any concerns for 2020 where you wonder that, if everyone's doing four running, if a significant part of the market and sharp guys switch over to your strategy, is there any concerns on your part that it won't be as good as it was for you last year?
100%. And we're starting to see a lot of hyper fragile builds this early in the season. Now, I don't think this is going to be relevant in August, because I think in August we're going to have so many new people coming into best ball that they won't be using this hyper fragile strategy as much. It's the people that are drafting right now are the ones who are watching these shows, are the ones who are paying attention to what happened in the previous year, the ones who are reading the articles. So to your point, without a doubt, and let's take the extreme. Let's say that you're in a draft and the other 11 teams are all going to go hyper fragile. That's 44 RBs, and then they're done. If you knew that you could get the 45th, 46th, 47th RBs in the 16th, 17th, and 18th round, let's draft backwards. And what do? Well, to be honest, I'm not going to go 0 RB, because I still don't want to only have RBs 45 to 49 on my team. Like, it's still not what I want to go for. But maybe now I'm more willing to say, like, okay, in that 17th round, I know there's going to be some solid running backs there. And maybe I build into my draft that a little. And so what I've actually been doing as my zigzag is I still want to get my first 2 running backs early on in that, kind of top 3 rounds, because I do feel that there still is an argument here and it's still logic. And I'm not really giving anything up at this point, because it doesn't matter how people are drafting changes. This is the same we saw last year. People are still drafting running backs predominantly in those first couple of rounds. You throw in some wide receivers and such. And I think people grabbing those elite wide receivers, in my mind, is a bit of a kind of flaw, unless you're getting your stack and value, blah, blah. But so what am I doing? I've actually started going with formats where I'll end up with 5 running backs. And why is that? Okay, well, I still get those 2 that I talked about. But now what I'm doing is I'm waiting a little later to grab my other 3 running backs, because the difference in the top ones haven't changed. But what we are seeing is, because people are only grabbing 4, or they're grabbing fewer ones, that last tier, instead of that going in the 10th to 12th round as we saw last year, your guys like, I guess Tariq Cohen is going in the 18th. You're seeing Jerick McKinnon going in the 18th. You're seeing all these guys that I think otherwise would probably be drafted. Yeah, exactly. And I think guys that would be going.
It's true. I've only done a few underdogs, but I'm surprised by how many running backs are sitting there in the 17th, 18th round.
Yeah,
and it's different than the FFPC. My main way of playing regular best ball this year, especially early, was to go one good running back, right? First or second round, I'd grab a stud, and then I would do 6 or it's 28 rounds in the FFPC, and I'd end up with 7 running backs, and because early before the draft, I felt like I had a lot more chances of. Like Gaskin was going in the 8th, 9th round. That was one of my targets. I said, well, they might draft someone, and then that pick won't be very good. But if they don't draft someone, he'll be going in the 5th, 6th round, and that's good. So I felt like before the draft, when we don't know where the rookies are going, there's a lot more chances. There's a lot more undefined roles. I haven't been doing it as much because I do feel like the first, second, and third round, Dobbins is in the third, Miles Sanders is in the third. I feel like there's some good running backs in the third round. I even started one draft with 3 straight running backs, which I don't do very often. Any thought about the one running back and then taking more shots later?
Yep. No, I definitely don't hate it at all, but it makes me want to think, okay, but what am I doing with that early round capital? Let's say I get Christian McCaffrey with the first. Okay. I still want to kind of go with a hyper fragile build. I still don't want to devote a lot of those late running back slots to my running back position because, as we said, those are the ones that are least likely to contribute. So I want to figure out, okay, but I know I'm not going to draft another running back in the second or third because for whatever reason, maybe the guys I don't like or whatever. So I'm definitely grabbing tight end. I'm definitely grabbing Waller or Kittle if they're there because in this strategy, I still want to say what position am I willing to be okay being light at and making up for it with depth. And so that's probably wide receiver. And so that's where it's just difficult for me to say like, okay, how do I don't want to load up with a wide receiver. I'd probably be okay. And I've done this before. I'll go Christian McCaffrey. I'll grab an elite wide receiver. I don't know who's there now. Ridley, Jefferson, someone like that. And then that tight end. But now what I've set myself up for is saying, okay, I'm not grabbing another tight end until the end of the draft because I've already spent a lot of exposure to that. I've got my Christian McCaffrey. I'm likely not going to be drafting another running back for a little bit because we're about to hit that fourth, fifth turn is not a great spot. So now I'm going to get some really nice wide receivers. And maybe, you know what? I should have actually looked for someone early on that I could get a nice stack with. And that's a little challenging because maybe I'm okay with spending up on QB in this situation because I know that, hey, I've got tight end locked up. I've got one elite wide receiver and I'm still going to get depth there. Let me make sure that my QB is also in a strong spot because the last thing I want is to end the draft with 2 weak positions. And the way this draft is kind of working out is QB's a risk, if you don't take that elite one because you're at one of the turns and stuff and you got to figure out how you play that. But overall, hey, it's always great to try different draft strategies. I haven't found ones that I feel great with when I'm drafting 2 wide receivers early on. And more often than not, I'm not even drafting 1 wide receiver in those top 3 rounds.
Yeah. I mean, it's not where I've been at, but the one thing that historically, that's the way you playing is the way I historically played, right? Get your running backs. And the reason is because, as you said, there's always every year, Aguilar is a guy that I've been coming around on. Do I love the team? Do I love no, but he's an explosive guy who's going to be on the field probably 70-80% of the snaps. He doesn't need that good of a quarterback to pay off a 16th, 17th round ADP. Every year there's guys like that. So I get your point that the second and third wide receiver on every team these days is on the field way more than a backup running back who literally needs an injury to give you points. So I do like it. It just is a little different than the way I've been playing.
And I will throw out there, what I'm talking about is primarily Underdog. I think it does apply, but there's some slight tweaks for other formats as well. But Underdog, you're talking half PPR, you're talking no bonuses, and you're talking 18-man rosters. When we move over to DraftKings and we move that to 20-man rosters, we move it to DraftKings-style PPR plus the bonuses. And then, as you said, you're talking 28-man rosters for the FFPC. So without a doubt, there's obviously some tweaking we've got to do for each of those formats. But majority of my discussion is around that Underdog. DraftKings, there's slight tweaks as well, but the structure still stands. I haven't done actually any or many of the 28-person ones, but that'd be interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because I haven't been able to play Underdog, right? So and I don't play FanDuel. I play DraftKings DFS. I'm more of a PPR guy. So it's true. This strategy does seem to be a little better for the half PPR strategy. So FFPC, you know, it's funny. You talked about it. That was my next two questions. The FFPC, as mentioned, has come out with a nice tournament. It's 18 rounds. How does tight end premium and the fact that you only need to start two wide receivers change your dynamic of how you would approach an 18-round draft?
Interesting. Okay. So FFPC, PPR style for those two wide receivers. What were two running back, two wide receiver, one or two flex?
It's two flex,
okay.
And tight end are 1.5.
Okay. The two wide receiver doesn't change much for me because I still am probably going with a quantity style. I don't think it's worth it from a draft wise to try to say I want to draft four awesome running backs and I want them to all count for me every week and such. I'm still taking that kind of hyper fragile build. With tight end, I think I would say
You're certainly not getting Kittle or Waller in the middle to late part of the second round like you might on Underdog. They're going, you know, Waller is kind of past Kittle. He's going anywhere from 9 to 14. And, you know, you might get Kittle around 2.5, 2.6, but after that, he's gone.
Right. I'm more okay with definitely taking one of those because, again, when you're playing for an upside stance, the weekly upside that they can provide you as well as the season is unmatched by other tight ends. The other thing I would say is I'm probably more inclined to only go 2 QB and to grab 3 tight ends if I don't get one of those elite top 3 tight ends there. And that's probably becomes my go-to format for that one. It would be the 2-4-9-3, where I still take my hyper fragile build. I'm still getting my running backs, hopefully just, you know, only spending those 4 slots on it because it's PPR style, because I'm still looking for 4 and stuff. And, you know, that most volatile position, I'm still going to go with the depth and quantity for the wide receiver. But yeah, the, you know, nice thing is with PPR and tight end premium for FFPC, those guys might end up in your flex spot more often than not too. So if you end up with 3 of those and you get 3 quality, I don't think that's a bad thing at all.
Yeah, I'm definitely on team 3 tight ends. Unless I've got a Kelsey, if I've got a Waller, you know, it again, at the point, you know, you've got to think, you know, people are like, well, it's PPR, you know, so a tight end premium, so all tight ends are more valuable. Not really. You know, that guy who gets 3 catches a week and he's touchdown dependent, he's not much more valuable on FFPC than he is anywhere else. But you do kind of, you know, when Jack Doyle was playing well, for instance, a guy like that who might get you 60, 70 catches, yeah, finding someone like that later is good. All right, let's talk about DraftKings. It's open and it's 20 rounds. So how much more likely are you to grab a third quarterback in a 20-round format?
Yeah, I don't think going 3-3 there hurts you too much. I think I only just did my first one today, just because, you know, been talking about it and wanted to make sure that I had a bit more kind of familiarity for this year, how things are going. Because I think it's you who was telling me the QBs have been going so high over there. And to be honest,
crazy.
I don't get it because on DraftKings more than any other site, pretty much QBs are less valuable. Why? Because first off, PPR makes wide receivers in other positions scoring more points and making them more valuable. And then throw in the aspect of, obviously from a bonus standpoint as well, it really just kind of levels the playing field. Because if I'm trying to get my running QBs, well, those kind of lose some value because the other guys, your Kirk Cousins that are just slinging it and going to throw in some 300s, it just across the board levels the playing field for QB. So more than anything with DraftKings, I don't want to spend up on QB. I still want my rushing guys with upside. But because I've got those extra 2 roster spots too, I'm okay if I just say, hey, I'm going to get, maybe 1 or 2 guys with upside and then still provide a bit more of a flyer with a late QB there. And overall, you can, with 20 slots, you can still go with a 3-4-10-3 or a and I think that's 14. That's 20 spots right there. And I'm still getting my hyper fragile build. I think a lot of people are going to be going with a 3-5-9-3 format. Where you get that hyper fragile, but maybe you grab a little later guy. I haven't been seeing as much of the I only did one. I haven't been hearing as much of the hyper-fragile builds over at DraftKings. It seems like most of that discussion is around an 18-man roster with Underdog. It'll be interesting to see whether or not that carries over.
Yeah, I mean, I did a couple DK, and they're definitely a little looser for sure. You seem to get a lot. You talk about how you save in most of your bankroll for August when the it's not filled with guys like us following podcasts. DraftKings seems like it's like that already. You get a lot more. Like, how did I got DeAndre Swift in the 4th round in one today. And I'm like, how does that happen? Yeah. I'm not too afraid of Jamal Williams. How about you?
Yeah, I think type A back, what the quote was not too scary for me. I think when they say type A, they're talking about more the kind of structure and the way he plays the game, not type A as in like he's our number one, like geared to be a number one running back. And I think that's just a coaching NFL diction thing that was kind of I don't want to even say miscommunicated because the coach said what the coach said, but it was misinterpreted or at least kind of carried out and gone long ways there. But no, overall, DeAndre Swift is a phenomenal talent, especially in the catching game. If he can get anything kind of a rapport going, Alvin Kamara light season as well in the playbook.
That's the guy I compare him to. I feel and Campbell came over from New Orleans, saw what Alvin Kamara could do. I know he's kind of a meathead, and even Anthony Lynn, I mean, he is not a great coach, but if you're an Austin Eckler fan, he gave Eckler exactly the amount of usage he should have, right? So Swift, I think, is more of a talent than Eckler. And so I don't have any fear. Well, I won't say I don't have any, but there's not too much fear on my end that he's going to screw that up.
His risk is baked in. And where he's being drafted, the risk is baked in. But again, exactly. We're playing for upside, and he, without a doubt, has ability to be an RB1, a top 10, top 12 running back.
As dumb as a stone as Matt Patricia was with running backs, once Swift showed what he could do, they ramped him up, right? Mike Tyson said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Every coach has a plan until they see what DeAndre Swift does with the ball in his hand. And ultimately, these coaches want to win games, and he's a rare talent in my book. Let's talk quickly about exposure, as we could probably spend a whole episode just on the subject of exposure. You're building 150 teams. You're drafting running backs in a certain round, let's say 1st, 2nd, 3rd round. I know I've got very specific ways that I look at exposure when I'm building my portfolio. I'd like to know what your thoughts are and how you build your portfolio.
Yeah, overall, it's probably one of the least things that I pay attention to during a draft. A lot of people are like, when they're trying to do a draft, they're thinking like, oh, shoot, like I've drafted this player a bunch. Like I'm going to not take him this time. I don't want to be making those decisions in the draft. So in the draft, I'm deciding on 2 things. Really one thing. I'm deciding which position should I draft now. And based off that, I'm then almost always going to go who's the top in my positional unless there's a stat consideration. So from an actual exposure, it's not coming into play for me during a draft. Where exposure comes into play for me is in between drafts. So after the draft, when I'm doing an analysis and I'm looking, probably every week or two, I'll probably go through and kind of do a refresh of my rankings and look at, where am I getting a guy? And I'm spent, if I got 25% of last year was probably someone like Jamison Crowder. I just ended up getting him everywhere. And I asked myself, okay, why do I have so much Jamison Crowder? First, I need to figure out, okay, am I willing to take a stand on this player? Is there something I am seeing about the player, about the QB connection, about the team, about the offense? Am I seeing something that everyone else isn't? If I don't think I am, then I probably say, okay, let me reel this back a little, and maybe I should decrease my exposure. Other side of things is I say, okay, no, I actually really like Jamison Crowder. I think everyone else is kind of missing something, but maybe I'm drafting him too early. Because if I've got 25% of him, I'm getting a ton. Is it possible for me to maybe wait around and get him later and still have decent exposure to him, but be getting additional value? So I'll take my ranks and I'll try to kind of mock it down. I'll say, okay, I'm going to drop him a little because, hey, I can still get that exposure. I can still draft my guy or whoever it is, but now I'm getting an additional round of value that I may otherwise wouldn't have gotten. And so I'll just kind of continue this, make it a continual iterative process on an individual basis. And the last thing in my exposure I look at is stacks. I really don't care about QB exposure unless I have some kind of crazy outlier. But what I do care about are which stacks I have exposure to. And just kind of thinking through, like, at the end of the day, I want to make sure that my structure is right. I want to make sure that I'm betting on the teams that I think are strong bets. And that's where I'll kind of look to see, like, okay, which QB, which wide receiver, which kind of a stack exposure. Maybe I got a ton of this QB, but for whatever reason, like you were mentioning in our pregame, you get a whole bunch of Lamar. Now Lamar is actually not a great one because you don't have to stack him. But let's say you have a player, you're getting a bunch of him, but you're not getting his primary stack partner. Maybe you should be asking yourself, why am I so high on this player, but I'm not able to reach or not willing to reach or willing to maybe go a slightly above ADP to get that wide receiver? And that's one of the mental exercises I'll do kind of in between drafts.
Actually, for Lamar with me, I've got him with Andrews a lot.
Yeah,
and,
I agree.
Andrews, even in FFPC, was going, late fourth round for most of the offseason. I feel like, the Ravens were due to regress last year. I had almost no Ravens exposure last year because the ADP was too high. But I feel like the fact that they tanked, human nature a lot of times is for things to go too far the other way. And I'm more than happy to take Mark Andrews at the end of the fourth. And then if I get a chance at Lamar in the sixth, I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's just a no-brainer. And then if Marquise or Bateman falls in my lap, fine. But I've been able to do that. So, we were talking about, for me, exposure is similar to what you talk about, but, definitely you added another layer there. But what I do is it's very rare for me to like a guy enough to have 20, 25, 30% of them. There's always other guys in that range I like almost as much. And so the way I look at it is I will mix it up based on bye weeks, based on stacking, and also based on exposure a little bit during the draft because the worst thing is to end up liking two guys very similarly. They've got you've got an 18 to 20 point difference over the course of a whole season in their projection. But if one guy gets hurt, 18 is 1 point a week. So I will mix within a tier, but I won't drop a tier for a strategy. It's basically been the way that I've done it. We talked about
that makes sense.
It has for me. I'm always open to improving it, but that's kind of how my best 2 years in best ball, I didn't have more than 23% of anyone. And it wasn't because I had the throttle down on anyone. It was, a combination of guys that I was heavily on early in the season. I was either right or wrong about, and their ADP changed, or because I just mixed it up with other guys I liked. And it just worked out that I didn't have more than 23% anyone. Stacking's become the standard now in tournament best ball. In regular best ball, I've always used stacking as one of the tiebreakers, as I just mentioned. How far will you chase a stack during a draft?
Yeah, so we did some research on this that established the run as well, and Leone put out a good article that basically showed if across your stack you are giving up more than 2 rounds of value, it's worth less than the actual stack itself. So the value of stacking is not only diminished, but eliminated if you're giving up 2 rounds to get there. Now, one note is that not all rounds are created equal. So if you're giving up a third to a fifth, that's a hell of a lot more than if you're giving up that 16th to the 18th. And so overall, I want to stack. I'm thinking with stack in mind, but I'm not going to be reaching to get it. And so 2 other dynamics here that I think are interesting. One to keep in mind is if you nail those 2 wide receivers early in a draft and you get them, let's say this year, CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper is a good example because late in the draft you can get them both. Maybe you don't reach on Dak Prescott because who else is going to be reaching on Dak? You've already got Amari and CeeDee. No one else has a cowboy except maybe Zeke by this time. So there's a better chance that you may actually get some strong value on Dak falling to you around, and that gives you a huge leg up against the field. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. And with Joe Burrow, it's another good example because you've got 2 or 3 of his wide receivers going pretty, significantly above where he is. So if you've got all those guys, chances are, it doesn't always work, but chances are no one's going to be reaching for that quarterback to not even create a stack. So that's one note. And then the other thing around stacking is you also don't need to have a quarterback to stack. So let's say you did wait on the Joe Burrow and you're like, oh, I got Jamar Chase, I got Tyler Boyd, and then somebody grabbed Joe Burrow. I'm screwed. This team sucks. Let's burn it up. No, the truth is that team can still be really strong and you can still count it as a stack because this isn't just 1 week game where we need that QB and wide receiver to blow up. We're making bets on a team across an entire season. So in this situation, you're making a bet that the Bengals are going to be a great passing offense. Maybe there's correlation that actually that third wide receiver, T. Higgins, actually ends up getting hurt. So it actually increases your Jamar Chase and it increases your Tyler Boyd. And you don't need to have that QB to still have positive correlation between those 2 players across an entire season. So that's my biggest thing on stacking is that people kind of they get too scared and they draft and they really reach on their QB because they're like, but I've got the stack. I have to grab him. But in reality, it's actually more valuable to wait and hope that he falls an extra round to you. And if he doesn't, it's not the end of the day.
I agree completely. For me, I'm willing to move up a little bit for a stack, but I'm not willing to. It's good that, Mike put numbers to it. I never would go up 2 rounds. I might go up a round.
Right.
Early I'll go up 5 or 6 picks. The way I've always described it is if I've got a tier and I've got one guy in the top of the tier and the guy for the stack on the bottom of the tier, but I have them in the same tier, yeah, I'll reach for that stack, sure. Because I'm not, the fact that I've got them in the same tier means that I see them pretty close. But I'm not going to drop a tier to go get a stack. You give up more than you gain. The other thing I just thought of while you were talking is, what do you think about, maybe it's a little galaxy brain, but in the scenario where you don't get Joe Burrow, what about adding a quarterback in division? For if value is neutral, they play twice, you get 2 chances of a blow-up week.
Right. Not the worst, and especially if they play in the playoffs. And if they had won, and that's where I'd say, your thought process isn't wrong. If all else is equal, sure.
I've never thought it before, just 2 seconds before.
But I think more so focus on that. Let's see if that week 17, week 16, because especially for the underdog, week 16 is the most difficult one to advance. Because I believe you need to finish in the top 2 of the regular season, top 2 of the next week, top 2 of the next week, and then week 16 you need to finish first out of 18. And then week 17 you have to beat, I think, 150 others to win that million. But that's where I would take your strategy and say, okay, so Bengals, it doesn't work because they're playing the Chiefs and that's Patrick Mahomes. But let's see what else. We've got the Bills and the Falcons. So maybe you grab Stephon Diggs and someone reached on Josh Allen. All right, maybe you want to grab Matt Ryan because you think that game becomes the blowout. And that's maybe where I'd kind of take your thought process and continue to expand upon it.
All right, good.
Let's draft.
All right. I do go. Oh yeah, I can ask you 1 or 2 more while we're.
Want to set it up?
But I did have one other thing, but I don't want to lose it. Oh, FFPC.
Okay.
Really interesting. Their format. First and second place regular season advance, and then the top 3 each of the next 3 weeks advance to the finals.
Okay.
Does that
out of 12?
I love the fact that you've got 3 shots every week to advance. What are your thoughts? Change anything?
For me, strategy-wise, I think I would just say it's that much more important to get as many dart throws through your initial league as possible. Because, in that format, it's more about just let me just see how many I can get through. Because if you only need top 3, you don't need those kind of 1% outcomes. You really only need top 25% each time. So that's where I would say, like, hey, stick with your process and all, but don't go crazy trying to get that crazy one Criterion guy in the 18th, because your upside from a weekly basis isn't as important. It's more important, just make sure you win your league. And then there's enough fluky stuff that you got to finish top 25% each week going forward. That's doable without having that kind of one absolute grand slam guy.
All right. I got to take that one step further. Does that make you any less likely to have a hyper fragile build with only 4 running backs?
I would do a hyper fragile build in a 12-man normal league as well. The win rates and the data that we've seen are still strong. End of the day, I'm trying to finish, in that top 2-3. Maybe because it's top, and you said it's top 3 every time?
Every time.
Maybe it makes sense to say, like, okay, you go with a 5 running back with what I was saying. But, like, overall,
right.
The structure still, like, yeah.
I think, all right, let me get to, I thought I was logged in, but it looks like I didn't. Just give me a sec.
Okay.
I want to do it on my desktop so everyone can see it.
Yeah, sounds good. You let me know when to click it, and I'll jump in, and hopefully we get the same one.
All right, I'm going to jump in first real quick and see how many are left.
Okay.
All right, go.
All right, I am 5 more to start. We're in.
All right, cool.
All right, let's see. Let me put a tweet out and see if we can get some people to join.
Oh, I definitely put it in the Discord of ETR, so hopefully we get some ETR people.
You just did that?
No, I did it earlier. I didn't do it just now.
Oh, okay.
What I'm going to do now is share my screen. Can you see it?
I can. Yes, I can.
All right, cool. Come on, guys.
Just put out a tweet as well. Let's see.
All right. So, I think we covered all my stacking questions. Let's talk about handcuffing. Something you talked about in your article that I definitely agreed with. I will handcuff if I feel once in a while if I feel that the guy has standalone value. But I'm guessing with 4 running backs, you're not doing any handcuffing.
I won't handcuff in general. There's all you're doing is playing for safety, and so you can give me scenarios or give me a player, and I'll try to figure out like if there's an exception. But in general, if you're drafting that top end running back and you're trying to save his backup as well, that backup is only performing if your running back is significantly lack of performing. And in that situation, there we go. We are starting now. But the general idea is if that elite running back fails, I'm not going to do well anyways. So I'm not trying to just protect myself and finish top 6 or anything. So don't play for just that. I think the only exception is if you think both players can outperform their ADP, and maybe there's an example with like a Trey Sermon and a Raheem Mostert. But even then, it's still very difficult, and I'd rather just kind of make a bet on, say, one of those significantly outperforms and use that other spot for another player.
Yeah, the way I always phrase it is people don't realize that your leverage on, let's say, in your article, you talked about George Kittle. To me, your leverage on George Kittle is all the lineups that don't have George Kittle.
Yep.
right? Like if you end up with 15% George Kittle, that means if he gets hurt, you're going to have an advantage in 85% of your drafts. Why do you need to weaken the team that does have Kittle?
Right.
Yep. All right. So we're drafted right next to each other too.
Yeah, we're 7 and 8, so this will be interesting. So let's see. We'll be stealing each other's guys, I'm sure, throughout this draft.
Well, especially since I'm showing my cue.
All right. I will, for the purpose of education and fairness, I will make my decisions.
I'm not going to put them in order, so you're not going to know who my favorites are.
I'm not going to be making a decision off of yours because I want to make sure that every decision I make, I can kind of talk through why I'm doing it and kind of look into that likewise. So starting off, we got pretty chalk, Christian and Dalvin. I think Saquon number 3 is a little interesting with what we've been hearing from from an injury perspective, from maybe slowing him down or something.
I've got one Barkley out of like 40 or 50 drafts so far.
Okay. Yeah.
I just feel like even if he was healthy, the offensive line's not great. And I don't like drafting first-round picks coming off a major knee injury.
So I'm between Zeke and Jonathan Taylor, and I actually prefer Zeke this year.
I do too. I would have taken Zeke also.
Yeah, I think my thing with Jonathan Taylor
is the splits with Dak are pretty impressive.
Right. I think that offense is going to be phenomenal. And I also think that Nyheim Hines is not going to just disappear. So I think Jonathan Taylor is still not a game script independent player. And if I'm drafting in that early first round or mid first round, I want a running back that I know is not really leaving the field. And Dak, even if you're not like a huge fan of Zeke and you want to go with the Pollard's a better player, the team feels otherwise, and the team is going to continue to use Zeke and in the passing game and in the goal line. And I'm just bullish on that entire team as a whole.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 away. I've only got 4 players. That could be a problem.
Looks like, and if I'm seeing on Twitter, we got Salvatore Conti is the spot that is right in front of me. So I believe that's Carcosa. I don't know if anyone from our chat is in this, but there's a couple names that I recognize from this draft. And Najee Harris going, 2-2.
I was just going to ask you your thoughts on him. I'm going to end up with 0 of him if he's going to be going where he's going.
Yeah, my concern is obviously, just from a risk standpoint, like he's being drafted at what his upside basically is in that offense. And we're just not accounting for the risk of, hey, he's a rookie and he may not even be the full-time. He may not even be the starter at the beginning of the season. And then the other thing is we saw from last year, I am
You're
up
up
right now.
By the way,
I am, so this is the interesting situation. Or do I draft?
I took CEH. I don't know if that's who you would have taken.
I'm gonna grab Gibson. So
that was the other guy I had. I was deciding between Gibson and CEH.
And so I'm fine with getting Gibson there. I think had Gibson and CEH been gone, now it's an interesting question where like you kind of have to go wide receiver because we're looking right now and you got like Devontae Adams, you got Hopkins. Whether or not people still have AJ Brown there, it's still a question. But it's a bit of a it's hard not to take that elite wide receiver here. I think I probably would have gone Devontae and just making a bet that Rodgers stays, but it's hard to make that kind of risky level of risk with a second rounder.
I have an unhealthy amount of Devontae Adams in the late second round at FFPC. Push comes to shove, I think Rodgers they're gonna pay him more and he's gonna stay.
Yeah. I try to think of it from a risk profile of what is the likelihood that Rodgers does play. And I have no reason to believe that it's anything different than maybe 50%. Maybe that range is actually 25 to 75, but it's somewhere around there.
Oh, really? I think it's more like 80% he plays for the Packers.
You think 80? Oof.
I do. But
If
I'm
it's
not a bettor, and you're
yeah.
better with numbers than I am.
I mean, but this isn't a numbers thing. It's a personality. It's a human thing, right? It's trying to read the communication that he puts out there. And I think for me, it just comes down to I don't think it's a money situation. I think it's just kind of a immovable. What is it? A movable force. Blah blah blah.
Versus versus the immovable force versus the something object.
Yeah. And so in that situation, I guess, but my thought is, if I think it's anywhere between 25 and 75, I don't know. Well, now I'm taking the 50% risk that Rodgers doesn't play. Devontae should be like probably a 4th rounder. And if Rodgers does play, well, then Devontae should probably be like a end of 1st, beginning of 2nd rounder. And so if I'm taking him late 2nd, that risk upside profile just doesn't work for me. But as you say, if it is 80%, now that looks a lot nicer. And I'm far more likely to say, okay, let me take him in the late 2nd, because 80% of the time he's actually supposed to be a end of 1st rounder.
Yeah. I also like Michael Thomas this year. I think he's fallen a little bit too far. I'm more worried about Kamara if Taysom Hill wins the job than I am Michael Thomas.
I 100% agree with you. We saw that even with Taysom Hill, Michael Thomas was still getting a ridiculous amount of the looks. Okay, here. So I got my 2 running backs. I do not like J.K. Dobbins. I don't think he has the upside, because I think they don't want to go to just a one workhorse running back. His efficiency last year on touchdowns is hard to replicate. I'm going to go with Keenan. Oh, do I go? Okay, I'm going to go with Cooper. I'm going with Cooper. I have the Zeke. Maybe I can get some form of a Dallas stack here. My other thought there was I was going to go Keenan Allen, and I'm big on Justin Herbert, where he's getting drafted, so that'd be a decent stack.
I do like Dobbins, but I don't like him quite as much in half PPR. And I've been drafting a lot of Keenan Allen this year. I think he's a very solid pick. I also had Terry McLaurin I was considering, but I think Keenan Allen is one of the few guys who has safety and upside.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So let me do a little more on Dobbins. So my issue with Dobbins is, it's really my issue with Chris Carson. It's my issue with teams where they just don't have a desire to have a workhorse one running back. And what I mean by that is, a lot of players, you're drafting and you're thinking like, okay, this player is going to either find their way into being the workhorse. Maybe you're drafting a later running back thinking if there's an injury, they're going to pick up the work for themselves. But those teams have shown us that they just don't have a desire to have only running back as a workhorse. And so in that situation, we're now drafting Dobbins at his higher end range of outcomes, saying that he's going to be as efficient as he was last year, when he's not going to get the additional touches, because they still really like Gus Edwards. They still are going to have that role for that second running back. And just like with Seattle and Chris Carson, they still found ways to give Carlos Hyde the ball. You don't just give Carlos Hyde the ball because he's because he's producing well, or because he's a great athlete at this point in his career. You do it because you just don't want to give Chris Carson 25 touches a game. And so this year it'll be Rashad Penny. And there's always going to be other guys in the wings, but I'm drafting for upside, and if my 3rd round guy doesn't have RB, top 10, top 12 upside, it's not someone I want to be devoting draft capital to.
Yeah, when he, early in the FFPC, he was going mid-2nd round, and all the reasons that you talked about were why I had 0 shares, right? Literally 0 shares. I've been getting them 3.8, I feel like 3.5 and beyond. I feel like he's got enough to pay off. Am I up? I'm up.
All right, talk through. What are you thinking here?
I'm still thinking that it's kind of odd that it's half PPR. Oh, man, I like tight end. I am going to go with Hawkinson. What's his ADP here? Uh-oh. No, I'm going to go with Godwin. Ah, fuck. I got DJ Moore by accident.
That's okay.
Too much talking.
That's okay. I had DJ Moore at the top of my queue too. I think for a wide
I like
receiver,
DJ, but
yeah.
I think he has a little less touchdown equity than Godwin, and I have him close.
Yeah, nope, that's fair. That's fair. So I actually am probably going to go with Josh Jacobs. A lot of people are down on him this year, but I think from a best ball as my third running back, I'm happy with him because that team in games that they are ahead, he's still going to be that workhorse. I don't see, the new threat. I guess Kenyon Drake in there. I don't see that as being a significant threat to his current role. I think that just becomes a bit of an upgrade from a pass down back and kind of just increase from a backup. But I think you still are going to get some high opportunity games for when the Raiders are in the game, when they actually want to just continue to run it with Jacobs. This is his third year in the league. Like, they're going to use him as a workhorse. It's not going to be every game, but for my third running back, I'm happy with that. And if I didn't go him, then I'm going wide receiver. And again, that's just not the way that I want my structure to kind of work.
No, I agree with you on Jacobs. I think I definitely don't mind him in the fourth, fifth round where I see him. Julio went 310, and I feel like it's funny that people were down on Julio before the trade. He's old. He's 32, and now that he's been traded to a team that historically runs the ball a lot, all of a sudden he's going to fly up draft boards. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Here's how I see it. Once we knew he wasn't going to be in Atlanta, his draft ADP and his kind of just value decreased substantially. Once we found out today, or when it was yesterday, that he's going to go to Tennessee, that's probably one of the best landing spots that it could have been for him. Now, is it better than Atlanta? In my mind, no, definitely not. Still definitely less than Atlanta. But when you compare all the other outcomes it could have been, I really like, from an efficiency stance, from the targets that are available, I think Tennessee is a really good landing spot for him. And I love it from an actual real life Tennessee football perspective. Okay, here I am. So in this situation, I've got that Zeke, I've got that Cooper, but I don't want to reach for Dak, especially when Kyler and Lamar from an ADP are above him. So that leaves me, where do I want to go with here? Mark Andrews isn't a bad one. I got to decide between Thielen. I'm going to go Thielen. I'm going Thielen. Okay. Thielen and Mark Andrews is kind of my back and forth there. But I think Thielen,
I don't have much. I have way more Andrews than I do Hawkinson. So I was thinking Hawkinson, but since I'm drafting with the best ball guru, I will take the guy that I like more this year, and that's Mark Andrews.
Yeah, and when I'm drafting in that spot too, and I see Lamar is still on the board, I'm grabbing Andrews in hopes that I may be able to get that Lamar on the comeback in what you're drafting again in about 6 picks. Where if I draft Hawkinson, I don't love Matthew Stafford just from the lack of a running perspective. So I'd rather it limits my stack potential.
It's not showing me my. Oh, there's the draft board. All right.
All right, there goes Lamar. So you lost that directly after.
Yeah, I didn't expect Lamar to make it back.
Nope. Okay, there goes Kyler.
I don't hate my team.
Let me take a look at yours. What are we looking at so far? So we got that first 2 round picks, JT, CEH. Nothing wrong with those. I like that as a combo. Then we got, we're very well balanced, I would say, right now. Keenan Allen and DJ Moore as the top 2 wide receivers. If I was you, and obviously we'll see how the draft comes to you, but there's a level of okay, those are pretty strong wide receivers. Do I just wait a bit? Now is where maybe I'd want to take a look at those running backs, because we're about to have a tier drop off after Chase Edmonds, Javonte Williams, and maybe Trey Sermon.
Yeah, I've also got James Robinson in that group. But there's a guy that I'm really high on that I'm one pick away, and I'm hoping he makes it.
Okay, let's see.
Hawkinson
just went. Okay.
So I am taking Javonte.
And that's a great third QB there. And in my situation, that's a great third running back there. He has that upside situation, but you also don't need him to immediately produce for you if he's a little slower to kind of get the wheels going, as you got that Jonathan Taylor PPR. Yep, agreed. And so my situation,
he's the I feel like Melvin Gordon is not dust, but he's getting there.
Right. And for a tournament style, it's even more valuable to have that Javonte, because, yes, you need to do well and finish in the top 2 for your league, but it's also more important to do well in the playoffs, and that's where Javonte Williams would probably, similar to what we saw with Jonathan Taylor last year. A little slower start, but once it started going, really, excelled in those last playoff weeks for us.
Yep.
And so for my team, as we said there, so I ended up getting Dak to fall to me. And so I was pick 6.
That's 6. Crazy.
And if we think so, that's
not crazy, but I mean, the fact that we're all sitting here talking about it, and there's a few people probably in the draft listening, I would have thought someone would have sniped you.
It's possible. And so his ADP is 58. I got him with pick 66. And CeeDee Lamb did go. Let's see who grabbed CeeDee Lamb, because that was the one guy that I was scared was going to snipe him. It's hard to tell because it's hard. Let's go with the board. So CeeDee Lamb went to FBG Val, who was in the 11 spot. But instead of going for the stack, he grabbed Kyler. So thought that was a little interesting. But no complaints there.
I had a tremendous amount of Kyler Murray the last 2 years, but I feel he's going a little too early this year for my tastes.
I agree.
I would much rather have Lamar a round and a half later, or Hurts 3 rounds later.
Yep, I agree. Trying to look to see whether we have. It looks like there actually aren't. We got a lot of people with 3 running backs right now. So I'm curious to see how many of those will kind of go with that hyper fragile build. We've got
let's do, like, when we're done, just a quick look at that, or as we're finishing up, let's go through and see how many actually do that. I think it would be interesting to track exactly how many are actually doing that. All right, you're up next.
Okay.
And you're not going to take the guy that I want.
I will not be grabbing Justin Herbert.
No.
Did you end up getting Keenan Allen?
I did.
Nice. Okay, so that's a solid stack, and that's what I was thinking. If I would have got the Keenan, plans would be grab the Herbert. I don't need the running back. I do like Trey Sermon, but with my 3 running backs, I'm more willing to wait on some value. I got Chase Claypool kind of a tier above the rest of the wide receivers at this spot.
That's who I would have taken had I not been planning on taking Herbert for the stack. So that's what I mean by, let's say you had passed on Claypool. I have Claypool ahead of Herbert, but that's, it's so close. That's when I would stack and not worry about the Claypool I had ahead of him.
Agreed. Definitely got to take Herbert there, because it gives you the Keenan Allen. And the other thing is, like, when I passed on Dak, you had Kyler and Lamar ahead of. When I passed on Dak, you had Kyler and Lamar with better ADPs still to go. In this one, you only had Herbert. And then really after Hurts, there's that big tier drop off. So it was almost a guarantee he would have gotten taken before he fell back to you.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, I just used it as an example, but there was no doubt I was taking Herbert there.
Right. Well, and his ADP is 70.6, and you got him with pick 80. So that's already fantastic full round value right there.
Yeah, QBs are going a little later in this one.
That's true. That's true. And we'll see how long that kind of lasts. Because where we stand, or at least where I stand, having Dak as my QB, I'm going to be grabbing value QB in the mid to late rounds. I don't want to completely just throw that second one, but I'm definitely not spending additional capital, and I'm definitely not going with 3 QBs in this. I'm definitely going to go for running backs. And so like this is where I'm starting to think like, okay, how does this team come together for me? And my biggest question mark right now is going to be, I'll let you draft it.
Yeah, I lost Juju. I got sniped. To me, he was a tier above anyone else I was looking at. Running back, I don't really have anyone here. I'm going to do a guy that I've been drafting a lot of. I'm going to take Antonio Brown a little early.
Okay.
I feel like he was the 23rd running wide receiver in PPR last year, walking off the street. And I don't think he's the same player that he was, but I think he's going to pay off value. Brandon Cooks was the other wide receiver I was looking at, but who's going to quarterback that team? Cooks has concussion issues. It was a luxury pick. Let's call it a luxury pick.
So I agree. Juju would have been a tier above. I think then I probably would have, with your team, grabbed that second tight end, and you have Andrews. So pairing him with a Goddard or a Higbee.
You know what? That. The only thing is that I found that there's a couple tight ends that are going so late here compared to Fanball or FFPC that I've been waiting on my second tight end because I've been getting ones that I really like 3 or 4 rounds later.
Yeah, maybe. And for me, unless I have one of those top 3, I kind of want to get 2 tight ends before that top 100 ADP expires. After that, I kind of feel that I've got a bit too much of risk and then start looking at 3 tight ends. And with the 3 tight ends, as you said, I'm then looking at those guys that you and I have talked about previously who feel like there's some late value there. Yeah, so where are you on Jarvis? Because I see we got him. I've actually got Jarvis at the top of my wide receiver board right now.
I mean, I never want to draft him, but he always makes me wish that I had. Yeah. So I've got no issues with him.
Yeah, no, I'm a Jarvis fan. His production has just been so consistent, and I think Baker, just continues to kind of improve. All right, so we just saw Higbee go. I was big. Yeah,
I would have taken Higbee. I would have taken Higbee.
Yeah, no, I could see that. All right, so we have that. Okay, so you grabbed. No, okay, yeah, I would have grabbed Higbee before you actually.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna grab Logan Thomas here as my second because, as I was saying there, like after Logan Thomas and Higbee, there's that big drop off in tight end, and now I can be pretty secure in saying if I look at my team. I've got Goddard and Logan Thomas. I'm done with tight end. I've got Dak, so I'll get another QB. I'm done with QB.
I'm gonna do that, but a quarterback instead.
Okay.
All right. So I'm gonna add Tannehill, who I don't think I think he's gonna start going a couple rounds earlier. And I feel like now with the weapons that he has, he's a very solid second quarterback.
Yep. Nope. I agree with that. I like Tannehill.
And again, the different, I'm not afraid to take a third tight end. Not saying I will, but let's see if the guy that I always like taking falls.
Right. And as you're saying, like if you get that guy, we got a couple people in the chat that are paying attention. So I'm not gonna blow your spot, but I know who we're talking about. If you get him,
Sonic, I didn't know Sonic was in. I'm watching the draft board. Hey, Sonic, no problem.
Looks like looks like Elmer Helmets. Yeah,
That's Sonic.
That's Sonic. Okay.
He's a fellow 1 week season.
Okay, cool.
I do work with 1 week season during the season, and he's another guy.
Okay, so you're going to be ahead of me. What are you thinking right here? You've got your QBs.
I'm going through and doing my queue. All right, so man, let's see. All right, so I'm going to take AJ Dillon.
Okay,
I think he has standalone value, especially here. And I also let me just look at my bye weeks. I also feel like he's one of those guys that if the number one goes down, I mean, he could be a monster.
Yep. No, I agree with that. And I think this was a good time to draft running back. I feel like there's a strong tier here. And so personally, I had Dillon as my second running back best available, but definitely very close. The guy that I really like is Rojo. And from what we've seen, I think we're a little biased because of what Leonard Fournette was able to do in the playoffs after Rojo got a little injured. But throughout the season, Rojo had some phenomenal games, and it seemed like they want him to really be their primary guy. I mean, at one point, they literally had a healthy Leonard Fournette benched. And the only reason he kind of found his way back in is because of that injury. So Rojo in the 10th round is someone who I am always eyeing. And that gives me my fourth running back, which I am now done with running back, done with tight end. I'm probably grabbing one quarterback and all wide receivers the rest of the day.
Interesting.
I also have 3 wide receivers that all have bye week 7. So that's interesting.
Season long, I don't care about bye weeks, but
best ball, I really don't care either, other than my quarterbacks. If I grab 2 quarterbacks, I don't want them to have the same bye week because missing out on 25 plus points it hurts. Tight end, I'm okay with having 2 tight ends with the same bye week. With my other positions, like wide receiver, doesn't matter to me because I'm going to have so much depth that I'm going to be able to cover that position. If I'm only drafting 4 running backs, I'm okay with 2 having the same bye week. Probably, don't want more than that.
Yeah, I still have some time to get the tight end that I normally like taking late. Let me look at some wide receivers that I like.
What team is Sonic? What's his name on here? Maybe we can do a little.
I think he drafted right before me coming back. So hold on.
He might be New Hampshire Payne. Yeah, he grabbed Juju, NH Payne.
Yep.
All right, so
he's a very smart guy.
Looking at his team, let's see. So he definitely started out with a bit of a hyper fragile. He's got Cam Akers, Aaron Jones. I like those first 2 picks. I like Trey Sermon, getting some strong value on him with pick 81. So overall, strong start. I hope he grabs a running back soon and just kind of sticks with those 4. He set himself up with Lamar early on, so only going to have likely 2 QBs there. Hawkinson with no second tight end. We might see him going with 3. But overall, I like what he's doing with the team. We'll see how that kind of keeps playing out. Okay.
Well, I'm glad you're done with tight end.
Yep, I am not grabbing tight end. This is my last QB in a tier. I have Dak. I don't have a wide receiver I love.
Can guess. Hold on. Oh, Cousins.
No, Cousins doesn't have the upside that I want.
Do you like Wentz?
I think Wentz has substantial risk in his floor that other QBs don't have. And Wentz is probably going to go about a round, maybe 2 rounds later than a Justin Fields. And I think, honestly, both of them have similar risk profiles, but the upside up.
Oh, fuck. I didn't see that you took. Oh, man, that wasn't the guy I wanted.
Oh, sorry.
It's my fault. I just fucked again. Let's well, I'll get a good tight end, but most likely. But that was.
All right, so no more running backs for you. You've got a solid running back core.
Yeah, and I like, and I don't. I was going to probably go with a fifth running back simply because I think Javonte and Dylan both have some risk.
Yep, no, I agree with that. Yeah, and I like Latavius Murray this year. As long as they don't cut him, and there is risk of that because of their cap situation. But overall, I think he's in a good spot.
Yeah, I think that he's he's going. Again, I don't know the ADP here like you do, but on FFPC, he's going like 25, 30 picks later than he did last year, and he gave you a 10.5% win percentage last year. And that's where I do think that win percentage is a good thing. Where it can show you opportunity. If he paid off, 30 picks earlier, I think he can pay off where he's at 30 picks later. All right. The guy I was going to take last time made it back to me. I'll complete the Tannehill Ferkser. I think that with Julio there, people are going to get a little cold on Ferkser, but I've always liked him back to when first time I heard about him was when one of your bosses, Evan Silva, sent out a blurb about him a couple years ago.
I like that. I am going to draft my fourth wide receiver that has bye week 7 and just keep that theme going of only wide receivers with bye week 7.
You're not worried about Beasley with Sanders there? Now it's a four-man show.
Nope.
Not that I'm worried about Sanders.
Well, but they don't have John Brown, so.
Yeah. You're right. But so Brown was hurt most of the year.
That's fair, right? And so I think Beasley is just it still has very strong phenomenal rapport with Josh Allen. He was still seeing games where he was putting up 9-10 catches. I love the offense in general, and so just getting some kind of pieces of that Josh Allen offense is very attractive to me. I think Cole Beasley just year over year is underrated.
Yeah, he's him and Jarvis Landry are guys that I just never draft.
Yep. Well, yeah, and it's interesting because people think best ball, okay, I don't want the underneath guy. I don't want that slot guy. I want the guys that are going to have the big plays. And that's fair and all. But the thing is, you get a guy like Cole Beasley, and he's getting these games with 8 to 10 targets, sometimes even that many, higher catch probability. And so you throw that in with the yards, and he breaks one or he gets a touchdown. Like, that's a huge game. And I'd rather have the player who has more opportunities to kind of break it, the one that's on the field, than just going for that one kind of home run guy.
Yeah, a lot of times the home run guy, I really don't want a guy who's going to go 2 for 60 and a touchdown because, it's an okay week. But, if I'm going to go for that home run guy, I want at least some volume as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's also a difference in drafting what I'm doing in the 13th and 18th. In the 18th, give me Cage or Hamler. Give me the guy who's only going to have that 2 for 60 with the touchdown. But as my 18th round, I'm okay with it. In the 13th, I want a little more.
Makes sense.
Okay, so we're coming back around. So yeah, right now, my draft board is just all wide receivers because my structure right now is 2 QB, 4 running back, 2 tight end, and I'm happy with those 2 tight ends being Goddard and Logan Thomas. I'm happy with my 2 QBs being Dak and Justin Fields. I'm happy with my 4 running backs. Would you be happy
with Andrews and Ferkser?
Probably not. It's in the fence. If I ended up with just those two, it's not the worst thing. But I'm also willing in that situation to grab a third tight end.
Yeah.
And I believe your tight end that you still like is on the board.
He is.
So I will not draft him here. As I said, I'm just going down the list with my wide receivers.
Yeah, this isn't going to be the best build for me, but I do like Hunter Henry here a lot.
Yep. And let's see.
I don't get why he's going that late. And half PPR, I think he can give you the 50-60 touchdown, 50-60 catches that you're going to get out of a lot of these wide receivers now.
Yep. And hey, if he can go for 50-60 touchdowns, he'll win you a couple leagues.
Yeah, that would be good.
But I mean, your structure, it's not horrible though, because now you're in a situation where if you spend up on your Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and so you devoted draft capital at the top of the draft with wide receiver, and now you haven't really drafted any besides that Antonio, and now you probably are going to go 5 more and take 8. It's not my favorite structure, and obviously one of those was just an accident with the Latavius Murray, but I think like you still have the possibility of building a fairly strong team.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would have taken Ferkser, to complete the stack, so I don't mind Latavius, and I don't mind a more traditional build. I get the whole fragility thing. And I'm sure that I'm going to do it more often than I have been, but I don't feel tied to it.
Right. No, completely agree. We should not be tied to anything. We got to take each draft as they come to us. You can have your, but it goes back to the getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
All right. Wide receiver. We still got about one more round of wide receiver, maybe 2 before it really starts dropping. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people really are talking about in best ball is with these hyper fragile builds and people drafting a ton of wide receivers, the end of the draft with wide receiver is very light. And it makes sense because previously you saw on average people were drafting like 7.5 wide receivers. So 7.5 times 12 puts you at about like what, 90? Let's do some math real quick. 7.5 times 12. Oh, 90 exactly. Okay, cool.
So I took Paris, and that you talk a lot about mini stacks. I've now got Paris with Jonathan Taylor.
Cool. Yep, I like it. And I think Paris Campbell is one of those guys that I think they're going to spread the ball around, but Paris Campbell, when healthy, unfortunately hasn't been, but like has looked really good on the field. Yep,
he certainly has. He fits the profile of, and Traquan was next on my board. So that's where, if it wasn't for that mini stack, I might have gone Traquan.
Yep, that makes sense.
Because, again, he's under the radar because he's, people just don't, he's going to be on the field.
Right. And
you have any interest in Emmanuel Sanders?
Yeah, no, I do. I have him as on my team right now, I will not be drafting him because of that by week 7. But in my rankings, I have him as the second best wide receiver available. Yeah, so Carcosa here made an interesting decision. Carcosa is the one that I said was mentioning on Twitter. I'm curious to hear his rationale because what he just did is it looked like he had a hyper fragile build going with Alvin Kamara, Chris Carson, and Chase Edmonds. But then his 4th running back is Rashad Penny. And in that situation, I really feel like you only have 3 running backs because you're not going to have games where you can bring both Chris Carson and Rashad Penny to the table. And for Rashad Penny to really, be a strong value, I don't know, like
you need Carson not to be that good.
Kind of, yeah. Or maybe Penny, I think more likely scenarios like Penny outperforms his ADP by a little, but Chris Carson then either underperforms or just doesn't smash.
I like Penny as a late running back this year. I mean, he's got more of a defined role than a lot of people going ahead of him.
Yeah, nope, that's fair. And
on a run first.
Right. And if Carson goes down, Penny can find himself into the Carson role. Now, I don't think that Penny would ever become like a top 10 running back with our workhorse style, because I think they'd have someone else play that other complementary role, because that's what as we were talking about.
Absolutely,
Seattle.
they would.
But like he's still, hey, if you're drafting someone in the 15th round and he has the potential to perform like a 4th, 5th with an injury, that's still product.
Yeah, he's going definitely a round or two later than I would consider him. Like, if I took him a round or two earlier, I wouldn't feel bad about it.
Right. Yep. And and once we're starting to get this late in the draft, it's really about finding your guys and finding your stacks, finding the ones that play into the lineup and the team you're building.
Yeah, well, I know who I'm going to take with my 18th rounder.
I'm not actually sure who you're talking about. I do like with Herbert. There's a couple guys that it could be.
Yes, there could.
But there's like two that I would. There's really three, but there's two that I kind of consider.
I like guys who flash.
Yeah,
I like guys who flash when they get a chance.
Okay. I have a choice here.
I don't love any wide receiver here, so I'm interested to see who you're going to take.
I'm going to grab John Brown.
I am going to take the guy that you liked last year.
And that's who I was between. My thought process on going John Brown above Jamison Crowder in this situation is that I have Elijah Moore on the team. And normally I don't dislike having two wide receivers from the same team. But I do believe that Elijah Moore and Jamison Crowder, Elijah Moore eats if Jamison Crowder doesn't, just from that individual situation. And I think there's a chance that Jamison Crowder might end up elsewhere, which it wouldn't matter. But yeah.
No, I agree completely. And, the thing with Crowder is if they do release him, he's going to end up somewhere.
Right. I agree. And yeah, there's a lot of decent situations. Like part of my process early on was not process, but just thoughts. If Crowder could end up in that Tennessee role, I think it would have been fantastic for the offense. You have Crowder underneath, you have AJ Brown opening the field. You've got the 8-man stack boxes for Henry. I think that would have been a fantastic addition to their team.
I agree. They spend a lot of money for Corey Davis, and then you get Crowder for free.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Crowder is not actually as old as people think.
You think Josh Reynolds is dead now?
He's going to get drafted in every draft above where he probably should be, I would say. Crowder's only 27 years old, but it feels like so much older. Yeah, I mean, like when you got to just think about like what has changed from the Reynolds situation, like where he was getting drafted. If you assume that was the right place, well, that was when he was the number 2 wide receiver and a ton of targets were open. He's now fallen out of that number 2. He's still new to the team. We're not even sure what role he's going to play on the team. They may just have someone else from a more slot or use that kind of tight end Ferkser style. It's just too much of the upside is significantly capped, and the risk is that he's not even on the field.
I agree. I took MVS, and this is where we probably diverge because of 80% versus 50%.
Yeah, no, I don't mind it though. I'm going to go with DeAndre Brown.
I mean, he has some pretty big games.
Yep, without a doubt. With Rodgers, definitely has those games. Yep. And one thing I've been doing is when I grab Devontae, like in that late second, I'm then more likely. I usually don't grab Rodgers because he's just not a player that I really want at the ADP. But instead, what I'll do is I'll grab a Lazard or an MVS late in the draft, and it's kind of making a correlation bet. And I'm saying that, well, I'm grabbing Devontae late in the second, so I'm pretty much making a bet that Rodgers plays. If Rodgers does play, MVS, Lazard, those guys are all going way too late. So it's basically saying if this team is live and Rodgers plays, I'm now getting not only value in Devontae, I'm getting those late wide receiver value as well, and it just kind of supercharges it.
Yep.
Yeah, Des Fitzpatrick too. That was one that people were liking as a flyer, but can't expect anything from Des Fitzpatrick this year either.
No. And, I find when it gets this late, I just like certain people more than other people.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, this is where it's more pick your guys. And you were talking about, exposure. This is where there's an opportunity as well as a risk to be very overweight on one player. And I think last year was an example where if you had your guy that you liked and, you grabbed 30% of a guy in the 16th, 17th round, you might have been missing out on T. Higgins. You might have been missing out on Justin Jefferson. I guess Jefferson went a little earlier. Chase Claypool. Guys that could you have predicted and foreseen it? Maybe. Or is it better to just say, hey, I'm grabbing a lot of exposure, especially with stacks? So like last year when I was grabbing Roethlisberger, I grabbed a bunch of that Claypool. When I grabbed Burrow, I was grabbing Higgins, not because I had any inside information or even perspective that these players were going to break out, but just, hey, if these guys do, I want to make sure it's part of my stack.
Well, and it's working back from that whole thought process of whoever you're drafting, you're counting on them having a big season, right? So in your Joe Burrow lineup, well, T. Higgins was a guy who could definitely make Joe Burrow go. So I do think you have to think about it that way.
Yeah, completely.
Based on, yeah.
Okay, there went my KJ Hamler. I was excited to grab him. Dallas doesn't really have any late stack guys at wide receiver, at least. I think that Cedric Wilson thing was quite fluky. I'll grab Anthony Miller here for the Justin Fields stack.
Is he still there?
In Chicago?
Yeah, I thought he got cut.
Google that. I had not heard that.
I'm going to go with Tim Patrick. I don't know. I could do.
Yeah, Anthony Miller's still there.
I could do something real nasty here. I'm going to take Jalen Guyton.
And so Guyton was definitely one of the guys that I was thinking of with regards to LAC. Also have the rookie, what's his name? Josh Palmer was already drafted. But it feels like Josh Palmer and Jalen Guyton have a similar profile from what I believe I've read and remember. And so from a stack player there, what do we want to do? So my temptation here is to grab a Dalton Schultz to complete a stack, and it would be an 18th round. But that gives me a third tight end when I already like my tight ends. This is where it's difficult to think, like, is it better to go with that wide receiver flyer?
Right.
Or say, hey, Goddard and Logan Thomas isn't the greatest of tight ends. Do I grab one more to kind of seal that?
I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So I'm going to complete the back end stack. I like Tyron Johnson. He's the guy. Guyton goes ahead of him, but to me, it was Tyron Johnson who flashed.
Yeah, and I wonder if Tyron Johnson, he flashed when Keenan Allen wasn't playing, right? Or when Mike Williams wasn't playing, one of the two.
Right, but you've also lost Hunter Henry there. I know Jared Cook is there, but I've stacked those two guys late before the draft. And, if there was someone else I really liked, I probably would have taken it. But basically what I'm trying to do here is hope that one of those two guys gives you a 12th, 13th round value and it costs me a 17 and an 18. But maybe, I don't get the impression you like that idea.
No, I don't mind it because I think you could also flick. They're both stacks. I like them from a player wise. I think it's just a difficult situation to figure out who it is between those and Josh Palmer, but like from 17th, 18th round value, it's not bad. I think you could also tell yourself a story that if Mike Williams got hurt, it then becomes the perfect scenario where Keenan Allen's value increases, one of these other two guys' value increases, and you've obviously got the Herbert. So like it kind of just comes into a perfect scenario there.
Well, and that's when, when I was doing it was, when I was doing a lot of it was February, March, before they let Hunter Henry go and they re-signed Mike Williams. I was betting that Mike Williams would leave and one of those two guys would fall into a pretty good scenario. I want to thank you for coming on. It was a pretty long podcast, but I had so many questions and I wanted to pick your brain, and I feel like I'm smarter than I was before. You can find Justin at Justin Herzig on Twitter, and you can also find his work at Establish the Run. I am a member of Establish the Run, and I think you should be as well. Also want to thank our friends at the FFPC. Next Friday is the Hardway Draft. It's the third year of that, a Football Guys $350 tournament. Myself, about half the field is high stakes players and the other half is mid-tier analysts like myself. And we're going to have 5-6 guys on the pod. Justin, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it a lot.
Cheers. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me. Great talking with everyone here. And if you do ever have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm on Twitter, Bunch, and happy to answer those, or in the ETR Discord. And overall, it was fun. So I look forward to seeing you in some more of these drafts.
Oh, I think that's pretty. I am going to be pretty FFPC heavy because that's what I've been playing, and I feel like I have more of an edge with But I now have a few more tools in the toolbox. All right, folks, that's going to do it.